welcome back and hello to all of our educators joining us on this special day. And essentially the end of the summer celebration for our virtual STEM Studio participants. Over the summer, we've had more than 300 educators participate in virtual STEM Studio coming from 16 different states in the US and 34 different countries from around the world. So I just want to give snaps to all of you guys that have been able to participate and really kind of joining us on this kind of adventure, this initial start, right, into this journey on inquiry. So as you can see, really value these opportunities to collaborate and really learn best practices from each other. So again, keeping that same mindset and keeping that same momentum going, we really want to continue this effort going forward too. Okay, and on behalf of the TGR Foundation and the TGR EDU Create team, who's also here today, we're very excited to have you continue this growth as we move forward as passionate educators on inquiry and just ultimately, really helping our students become empowered global citizens, right? This is really that time to, even now more than ever, to engage them in that sense and have them really think about, things outside of their own context in their own community. So, as you all know today, we do have a special guest in Keynote here that I will introduce in just a moment. But first, I would actually like to, for our educators here at the celebration today, to get to know each other a little bit more, since we're coming from several different weeks. And we're gonna just do a little brief inquiry exercise, right? What better way to do that than do this? So, as a reminder, I just want to share, you can keep your webcams on, share in the chat as we normally do. And obviously, you can also use your voice to share out as well. We're asking that since we do have, we'll have plenty of folks here today as well. And just to make sure that we can share out, you can use the raise hand feature in the participant tab if you do want to share something using mic. Okay. All right, so let's get started with our activity. Okay, so some of you might have seen some of this, but we love to start this off. And please, before you start typing anything in the chat, because I know a lot of you are already trying to answer this question with that kind of mindset, I like to share this image here with this simple question of what's going on in this picture. Okay, so think about this question to yourself at this moment. Okay, and what we'll be doing is we'll actually be placing you all into small breakout rooms for 5 minutes where you can spend some time looking at the details of this image. Okay, and also, introduce yourself to your group, to the other educators that are in your small group, and also just think about, discuss what do you think is going on in this picture. Okay, it's just a simple question. And after the breakout timer room is up, you'll be automatically brought back into this main room. And then we will then just share out as a whole group real quickly. Okay. So again, this image has been up here for a little bit. We're going to share the link to this image also in the chat so you can see it once you're in the breakout room. Jason, if you can quickly share that link for our group, that would be great.
Okay, yep, setting them up now. So I'm going to send you all to your breakout groups and you will come back automatically. So no need to worry about that. And you will see the timer that will bring you back. So I am going to send everyone there now. Have fun.
Welcome back, welcome back. So as you all are joining us back in, I'd like for you all just to share in the chat right now. Go ahead and type in, what your group discussed, what you felt, what is going on in this picture. So let's hear some quick thoughts in the chat. What is going on in this picture? All right, lots of good responses about stars colliding, asteroids colliding. Okay. Thanks, Manny, for sharing. The universe is giving us an explosive fist pump. All right. Brain spark, supernova. Sandra, it looks like an ant. It definitely does, isn't it? Okay. Christian, thanks for that question. Is it a collision or an explosion? All right. So thanks for sharing your thoughts in there. Also hope you had a chance to get to know your fellow educators in your breakout rooms as well. I'm just going to share real briefly what this is so that we can jump on to our next segment. This is actually a central dying star. Actually, has created this ant nebula. Basically bears resemblances to our sun, but the gas that streams away from this star creates kind of the distinct ant shape, right? So you might kind of recognize the thorax and the abdomen of this kind of nebula ant or ant nebula. And scientists really hope to study study this and see how it leads to greater understanding of the sun. So just kind of a little kind of introductory activity here, but also a side note, this image was actually found using the quick search from the Discovery Education Experience account that you all have received during and participation of Virtual Sim Studio. So please continue to use your Discovery Education account to search for images, text, videos, all that great stuff, resources that you guys have. All right. So thank you for that. So what I'm going to do next here is actually now start to transition over to our awesome keynotes. And I'd like to formally introduce Trevor McKenzie. He is an experienced K-12 educator in Victoria, BC, Canada. He's also the author of 2 publications, Dive into Inquiry and Inquiry Mindset. And he's also an inquirer expert, obviously, as someone who's worked in schools throughout the globe on Australia, Asia, North America, South America, and even Europe. And, he has a passion to support educators, and I'm very happy that he's joining us today along with our journey as, our educators here are looking to implement inquiry-based practices. So without further ado, let's all give some snaps to Trevor and welcome him to our celebration.
Thank you, David. I appreciate the introduction, and thanks everyone for the snaps. Very warm welcome, and thank you for joining me and giving me some of your time and your attention. I do appreciate the commitment. As David had shared, I am an educator. I teach at Oak Bay High School in Victoria, British Columbia, Canada. And, for quite some time now, I've been an inquirer. I've been an inquirer, a practitioner of inquiry. I've been a researcher of inquiry, and I've been a sharer of inquiry, an advocate. And I'm very thankful, very blessed, honored that I'm able to visit schools around the world in supporting them in implementing inquiry-based learning processes. So my school district is incredibly supportive. They give me some unpaid time to do this global work. And of course, in March, as we all have experienced, there's quite a significant pivot in what this work looks like. And now I'm doing this work from the comfort of my home in my office here. So, if you see my children running behind me or my dog, jumping up onto the couch, we'll just ignore that, like draw the curtain back on the reality. But thank you for inviting me into your homes quite literally. Isn't it a beautiful thing, that we could be all in such different areas regionally across the world, but here we are with a common commitment to better meeting the needs of our students in today's world for tomorrow's world. So I'd like to spend our time together, first of all, sharing some of my research. I think in sharing some of my research with you, it's going to set you off with some positive steps that you could take to bringing all your learning from this summer and your entire teaching journey, if you will, and taking some next successful steps to bring this good work and all that experience back to your students for a successful startup. So I'll share some research. It's not going to be boring research. I know when people hear research, they're like, oh, time to turn off the video camera and put my head down for a nap. It's actually quite fascinating. And I don't just say that because I'm an inquiry nerd. It is quite fascinating. And then I'd like to share my screen with you and share with you my love for the power of wonder. Just David's prompt there, that little provocation was so fitting. That was unplanned. We didn't talk about that beforehand. So I will talk about the power of wonder. I'd like to share with you what happens to the student's brain when they experience curiosity in class. And then I'd like to share with you a few stories of students that I've worked with, and not just to inspire, but also to maybe show you what is possible when you bring this good learning back to your kids, back to your students, and back to your school. So I will share my screen for that segment of the keynote. It's about 40 minutes. But I'd like to share with you the research now. And if you're the type of learner that's a note taker, I have 3 things I'd like to share with you that the research tells us. And if you're just an auditory learner, you just want to sit back and soak it in, listen for those 3 things. There are 3 big ideas. So, my research throughout my graduate work focused on identifying the barriers to implementing inquiry in the K-12 setting. Why aren't more schools doing this good work? Why aren't more schools bringing this experience to their students? And the research is fascinating. As I said earlier, it is quite interesting. And it's partly interesting because the research is diverse. It's decades old. Inquiry isn't anything new. It's been around for generations. Constructivism as a theory is quite old. But the research itself tells 2 stories. And both stories are true. And that's the fascinating thing, although both stories are entirely different. You know, one story the research tells us over on this end of the spectrum of the research is that inquiry can have a huge effect on learning. You know, inquiry can increase achievement. Inquiry can, you know, students who experience inquiry report that they have a more meaningful and fulfilling experience in school. They feel confident. They feel like they have a role and a hand in the success, in their success. And so that end of the spectrum, it tells that story. But then, as you can imagine, there's another end of the research spectrum that tells the exact opposite story. And that story is that inquiry has little effect on achievement, that students not only don't report out a meaningful and fulfilling experience, but they actually report out feelings of anxiety, uncertainty, and feeling overwhelmed. And so, you know, and in looking at the research, I can attest both are valid. Both ends of the spectrum are valid. And they're valid, to be honest, because they're talking about different types of inquiry. They're talking about entirely different processes. And from the outside looking in, we hear inquiry has an effect, inquiry doesn't have an effect. And we're left kind of with our hands up in the air saying, well, what do I believe? And when you look at the research and you tease it apart, you see that they're actually talking about two different types of inquiry. And so that brings us to the first barrier to implementing inquiry in the K-12 setting. And this is one of those items I'd like you to take with you. And I think by identifying these barriers before you, you're much more likely to have a successful experience with your students. So, you know, in isolation as an inquiry practitioner, I think you're much more, you know, you're more likely to be successful. But also, if you want to bring this good work back to your staff and your school and share your learning from the summer, this is going to help you share successfully and build capacity and build a culture of inquiry, if you will. So the first barrier has to do with, are we talking about the same inquiry? Are we using the same language? Are we talking about the 5 E's? Are we talking about the role of questions and provocation, such as David showed us? Are we talking about student agency? And ideally, we're really clear with that language with our students. So our students begin to own that language, and they begin in turn to own some of their learning. And as a school, as a staff, from principals to teachers to students to parents, are we all using that same language together? As you can imagine how problematic it would be if different teachers are talking about inquiry using different language. That's just going to cause, quite frankly, chaos and confusion for our students. They're going to feel overwhelmed and anxious and uncertain. So I encourage you to use the language from this summer with your students. Bring this language to them. Post this language in your classroom and point to it as you're using it and get them to use it. Prompt them to use it. I do sentence stems all the time on my board. Whenever my students come together to talk in groups of 3, I write sentence stems just to get the conversation going. And in those sentence stems, it's the language of inquiry. So when they connect and collaborate and communicate, they're using the language of teaching and learning that is going to build capacity as a culture of inquiry. So all this language that you've used, I'm going to propose that you bring it back to your kids, you make it transparent, you make it visible, and you revisit it often. The schools that don't have a common language, those are the ones that are further back in this inquiry journey than I think you all are going to be when you return to your schools. The second barrier is a little different, and it has to do with resources. And the schools that are further along in their inquiry journey and it being successful and authentic are the schools that have resources for their teachers. And resources look like many things. You know, resources look like my publications, but my books are too of a broad, diverse body of work. There are many fantastic inquiry practitioners, researchers, experts, sharers, and the more of that you have at your fingertips where you're looking for that common language, the more likely you are to be the best an inquiry practitioner that you can be. But books aren't the only resource. You know, another powerful resource, it's the community of which you're a part of. You know, right now, we are a community of inquirers. We have committed to this good work, and I'm going to encourage you to lean on each other in the coming months as you go back to your schools. You know, revisit one another, connect with one another. This is a global conversation. This is not just here with this cohort and the teachers who are attending today, but inquiry is a global conversation. And I encourage you to find the hashtags and find those like-minded people who are doing similar work and lean on each other and use them as a resource. And I think probably one of the most important resources I see in schools is the resource of time. You know, schools that have given teachers time to come together and work together and co-plan and co-design, that time is a really powerful resource. And I've always said that if that time isn't given to me, I'm going to make that time a priority. And so I find time, you know, I find time to connect with colleagues, whether it's over lunch, in the staff room. I sit next to those colleagues and I talk teacher talk, and I want to pick their brain and ask them questions so I could be a better teacher. So I've worked at schools in the past where time wasn't given, and I've just made it a priority. And so I'm asking you to prioritize your time if it's not given to you. Find that time for what you value and hang your hat on that. Stay true to that, because that will lead to successful inquiry. So we've got common language so far. We have resources for teachers. And the third one's fascinating. The third one has to do with agency. And in the educational discourse around the world currently, there's a lot of talk about student agency. And I'm sure you've been talking about student agency this summer in your learning here. And sadly, a lot of what I'm seeing being spoken about with student agency, some of us are getting it wrong. And what I mean by that is I'm seeing a lot of teachers propose that student agency is quite simply giving students choices on assignments. You know, you could show me your learning doing a PowerPoint presentation, doing an essay, doing an oral presentation, or doing an art project or a poster project. And that's not student agency. That's choice, but agency is ownership over learning. Agency is a genuine role in the decision-making throughout learning over some of the learning. Agency is doing the heavy lifting of learning. And so I ask myself continually, am I doing something that my students could be doing themselves if they had the skills to do it themselves? And so I need to nurture those skills so that they could take on some of that heavy lifting. You know, questions, for example, are an underpinning of the inquiry classroom, aren't they? And so who's asking the questions? I may start my year framing our learning in teacher-directed questions, but slowly as they build their questioning competency, I want their questions to guide our learning. And so you can see how the start point, the question, begins to be shaped by the student. So it's not just the products, the end point of learning from time to time, it's throughout learning, from the start throughout. So student agency is one thing, forgive me, but teacher agency is another thing. And this is where the schools who are further along in their journey hit it out of the park. It's when they have student agency, but they also have teacher agency. And what I mean by teacher agency in this sense is teachers are inquirers. Teachers are asking big questions of their own teaching. They're curious. They're full of wonderment about how to become a better teacher, how to become a better inquiry practitioner. And in exploring that, they do action research. They participate in summer institutes such as this one. And they take all that new learning and implement it in their practice with their students. And in implementing it, they're kind of coaching and modeling their thinking and why they're doing what they're doing for their kids. And their students end up watching what inquiry looks like through the experience that their teachers are sharing with them. And so I encourage you to consider that, you know, as an inquirer yourself, because clearly you're here with me now. You've been here throughout the summer. As an inquirer yourself, how can you bring more transparency to being an inquirer? How can you coach and mentor a little bit of your own thinking? You know, one corny thing I see in schools that I visit around the world, whether it's grade 1s or grade 12s, are teachers who do this. This is cool. They do this. They go, And they pause and they let that kind of sit. And what they're doing is they're just modeling, letting that thinking happen. And thinking isn't the first kid that puts up their hand, right? Thinking is, let's just settle into the learning and take time. And kids begin to recognize that when the teacher does this, it's symbolic of wondering and questioning and thinking and being curious. And so we do need to model that. We do need to live and breathe that space if we are hoping our students are inquirers themselves. So there are the three barriers. We've got that common language. We have, you know, are there resources for you? And is there teacher agency to the extent that teachers are inquirers and they're coaching and modeling inquiry for student agency to thrive? I'm hoping you consider these three barriers in your experience, in your context, whatever that may be. And maybe it's a green light, yellow light, red light reflection. Like green light, that's a non-barrier for me. Yellow light, that's kind of a barrier. Red light, that's a significant barrier. So as you return with all the learning from this summer, you have a really high chance of success. And this is not something we want to just gather dust on the shelf. We want this to seriously transform how you operate with your kids. And by removing those barriers as well as you possibly can, it's more likely to grow legs and be sustainable. So I'm going to transition to the slides. And before I do so, I'm just going to take a sip of water. Before I do so, I'm going to encourage you to ask questions in the chat. You know, I tend not to look at the chat at all. I know David and Jason are monitoring the chat. And so if there are questions, you know, we'll probably hold them to the end. But if I see something, if I do have a look and I feel like stopping, we may. But please, you know, as I'm sharing, if you have any questions, throw it in the chat, because at the end of the sharing, we will have time for a Q&A. So please, you know, I'd love to hear your questions, comments, anything that you're wondering about. So I'll go ahead and share my screen now. And I'm going to go directly to here. There we go. And I'm going to scroll up and I'm going to go into presentation mode. There we go. It's always weird seeing my face on a slide like that, so forgive me. But I wanted to give you my contact info because the learning doesn't end here. You know, this is perhaps our first time connecting virtually, but please do reach out to me. You know, I'm an open book, so to speak, no pun intended with the books there. I'm quite active on Twitter and Instagram. You know, on Twitter, there are almost 18,000 people that follow me. And that's not ego. What that isn't an opportunity, it is an opportunity for you to connect with that community. I can't tell you enough how many times this happens in a week or a month, how many teachers tag me in a tweet, and that's their kind of prompt for me to retweet them. And they tag me in a tweet with questions, with a need, with a challenge that they're hoping we could crowdsource with those 18,000 people. You know, just a couple weeks ago, I had someone in Australia tag me in a tweet looking for steampunk resources for inquiry. And if you know steampunk, it's a really unique genre, a fascinating genre, but really unique. And I didn't have anything in my arsenal, my bag of tricks. And I retweeted it, and within minutes, there were dozens of teachers responding. I do think that's my responsibility as a global speaker, is to connect teachers around the world. And that's one way that I'm doing that. And I offer you that community. So please find it. You don't even need to follow me to find that community. You can just tag me. Instagram is a growing community for me. I'm going to share some of what I do on Instagram in this keynote. I'm a big fan of Instagram for sharing resources, visuals, such as David sharing the prompt with us, the provocation. I do a lot of that on Instagram as well. My website is full of free resources. You don't have to pay for anything on my website. Everything's free there, including all the sketch notes that I'll show you in this keynote. And then the conversation at Inquiry Mindset, that's the conversation, not just of people who've read my books, but more specifically with people who are at the schools that I'm working with. I visit schools around the world, and that's how we stay in touch. And teachers are sharing resources, teachers are asking questions, and I invite you to be a part of that conversation as well. I'm going to transition here into some of my slides, some of my sketch notes, and these are all free on my website. So you can go there, download them. I use these with parents. I use these, I attach them to course syllabuses. I use these with my students. These hang in my classrooms. And this is where that research really doesn't paint a full picture. You know, free inquiry, when we kick our kids into the deep end of the pool over there on the far right, that's that low achievement side. That's where when we kick our kids into the deep end and we don't help them at all, and we haven't scaffolded appropriately, we haven't helped them with those skills and understandings that they need to be successful with agency, that's when inquiry falls short, is when we just try to do that. When you scaffold with these other types, the achievement on the other end of the spectrum occurs. Whereas students are slowly beginning to understand what this inquiry thing is all about, but more specifically, they sharpen those competencies: collaboration, communication, creativity, critical thinking, questioning, empathy. Those don't happen overnight, and they certainly don't happen by kicking them into the deep end without ensuring that they actually have those competencies. So teaching in the inquiry practice isn't just about content or our curriculum, it's also about these really meaningful competencies. So I encourage you to consider that in your inquiry journey. Where are you starting, and how are you modeling, and how are you scaffolding for those competencies? You know, really some of my work tries to demystify the process of inquiry, because students tend to feel a little bit overwhelmed when they are given an opportunity to have agency. And I love this one, especially for boys. Boys love the adventure of learning. They love any adventure, if you will. And I love this one as learning as a map. And you know, we're going to follow this map. There are going to be consistent check-ins and checkpoints. We're going to reflect and revise as we go. There may be obstacles, but I've got your back. I'll be with you along this journey together, and I'll help you. And I find teachers as well need to see that this journey isn't as ambiguous. Like there are consistent check-ins and checkpoints to bring this good work to students. So I do love this one, the process of inquiry and those common check-ins and checkpoints. You know, the 4 pillars of inquiry, these are 4 entry points into inquiry that we propose in my work. You know, whether it's exploring a passion, aiming for a goal, exploring a curiosity, or taking on a new challenge. I consider, you know, I ask you to consider which of these 4 pillars of inquiry could be entry points for your unit design, and for students to begin asking questions of their own stemming from one of these 4. I would argue that in all of your classes, students would attach themselves to one of those 4. If you give them those 4 opportunities to explore learning through, all of your students would find a home with one of those. And I say that out of experience. You know, those are the 4 that I've seen students gravitate towards as start points to their learning. I'm also big on looking at what inquiry classrooms even look like. Like it's such a blessed opportunity to visit schools around the world and be invited into classrooms and watch teachers do what they love to do. And although I'm looking at the teacher, I'm also looking at the space and what have they done differently with the space. And there are some really simple things we can do. We don't have to spend thousands of dollars on new furniture, but we can do some really simple things to honor wonders, curiosities, you know, make our thinking visible, documenting our questions and our thinking and making it visible and anchoring those throughout the classroom. So I just wanted to share some of these sketch notes as, you know, this is the scaffolding into the rest of the keynote. You know, what I propose doesn't happen overnight, and it definitely didn't happen by accident. It all happened with intention and research and using resources such as these. I'm going to talk about 2 really big ideas. So we'll split the keynote into 2 halves. You know, the first big idea I'm going to speak to is this idea of cultivating wonderment, that students are full of wonder, and in our classrooms, we can cultivate wonder in our curriculum. So our curriculum isn't something we cover. Our curriculum becomes something we explore and discover through student curiosity and wonderment. So I'd like to share with you a little bit of my ideas around that, the science behind curiosity, and then show you some provocations that I'm absolutely loving. And then I want to talk to you about the power of agency. We've talked about student agency. We've talked about that heavy lifting of learning and the decision making and learning. And I want to share with you 3 student stories that I just adore. And these are 3 regular kids who have done pretty amazing things. So I'd like to talk to you about Evelyn and Mitchell and Ethan towards the end of the keynote. But we're going to start first with this idea of cultivating wonderment. And I firmly believe that deep learning begins with a wonder and a wondering. And it's a fascinating concept to consider, you know, will students retain something long-term if it begins with a wonder? Will achievement increase if learning begins with a wonder? And what happens in the brain when a wondering is occurring, when a curiosity is sparked? And let's look at what is actually happening in the brain here. I love Matthias Gruber. You can see I've cited his work up there in the top left. He's got a great TED Talk. He's got a few articles out there. Find his work. He's fantastic. He's an engaging speaker. But what happens with curiosity? When curiosity is heightened, there are 2 areas of the brain that are stimulated. And we're talking about the midbrain, and then we're talking about the nucleus accumbens. And these are actually the same areas of the brain that are activated when there's an extrinsic reward, which is just really, really interesting. So when students are curious, it's the same area of the brain when there's an extrinsic reward offered. So let's play a game here. Let's imagine, you know, you're at a restaurant. Remember those days where we can go eat at a restaurant? That would be amazing, right? And you're at a restaurant and you've ordered that dessert. You've totally, I'm getting the dessert tonight. I'm treating myself. And you see the server come out of the kitchen with that tray with that massive dessert on it. And as they're walking towards you, that's your extrinsic reward, right? You know, you've waited long and hard for that dessert. And as they're walking to you, it's your midbrain and your nucleus accumbens that are activated. So just imagine if we were to spark curiosity, what that would do in terms of resilience, what that would do in terms of engagement, what that would do in terms of excitement for learning. it's the exact same as getting that paycheck. You know, remember when we got a paycheck sent in the mail and you saw it sitting in your staff mailbox and you see it, and that's the area of the brain that is activated. So the brain does some amazing things when curiosity occurs. And when it comes to engagement, excitement, resilience, sticking with something when the going gets tough, and when students give up too easily, if you start with a wonder and a curiosity, that is less likely to occur. Fascinating. I'm a big fan of this next slide, and I want to introduce you to David Gleason. And I don't know if you can see my webcam over here, but this is David Gleason's work. Dr. David Gleason is a fantastic psychologist. This book is called At What Cost? Defending Adolescent Development in Fiercely Competitive Schools. I met David Gleason in Johannesburg back in February. We were both supporting the same school. And David shared this slide with the audience there, and I've asked him if I could share it with you here today. It's fascinating. This is what happens when, with neurons connecting, when the brain is curious, when there's wondering, when there's learning occurring. And it's just such a beautiful image here. Like it's almost like it's uncontrollable. It's obviously it's organic, don't get me wrong, but it just to see these connections, to see these neurons grow and the synapses come together, I just think it's fascinating. And the study was all around curiosity and wonder. And let's have a good look at what happens when curiosity and wonder is occurring. Isn't that amazing? So, you know, there's a purpose behind curiosity and wonderment. I think curiosity and wonderment sometimes gets a bad rap in education. Like, you know, let's have rigor. Let's have kids do well on the test. And, you know, I'm not knocking standardized assessments, don't get me wrong, but I think there are so many other things in today's classroom that are either equally important or more important. And curiosity and wonder are at my forefront of the work I do with schools. How do we build and plan for curiosity and wonder? We do it through the power of a provocation. And David's slide at the onset of our time together, that's a provocation. It's meant to provoke thought. It's meant to provoke conversation. And it's meant to provoke curiosity and wonder. You know, we post these in classrooms so kids can see that when we use a provocation, we're trying to get the light bulb to go off. There's that visual cue. Like, we're hoping that what happens here is we spark something. And if it doesn't happen for you, it's not your fault. It's my fault in the provocation that I chose, quite honestly. And so a couple of things I want to share with you about provocations. I'm going to show you one here. And I'm going to ask you in the chat, just as David had done, to tell me what you think this is. And I'm going to show you a series of slides here. They're all images of the same thing. And just throw in the chat, tell me what you think these are. It's definitely something under a microscope. So that's your one and only hint. I don't believe I'm being so kind. That is so unlike me. Isn't it gorgeous? I'm always taken aback where my mind goes every time I see this provocation. Even though I know what it is, my mind always considers something different. Now, I'm not in the chat, but I don't know if anybody got it. These are actually teardrops underneath a microscope, dried teardrops. Fascinating. And this is actually Rosalind Fisher's work. And Rosalind Fisher is a photographer. And you can easily Google her name and find her publication. It's gorgeous. And I love this quote. She says, everything we see in our lives is just the tip of the iceberg. Like, isn't that provocative in and of itself? So I had this moment where I suddenly thought, I wonder, and there's that thing, I wonder, right? Where we pause and we think, I wonder, what does a tear look like up close? What would it look like if I dried a tear and I put it under a microscope? It was really interesting. It looked like an aerial view, almost as if I was looking down at a landscape from a plane. And eventually I started wondering, would a tear of grief look any different than a tear of joy? And how would they compare to an onion tear? And they're all different. All those slides I showed you are different emotions. They come from a person crying a tear of sadness or joy, or even an onion. And I just think that's fascinating, isn't it? And that's what we want with a provocation. You know, we want to tie the curriculum to you know, a concept that we're going to create a deeper understanding of with our students, and design a provocation based on that curricular concept. I love that one by Rosalind Fisher. Look at this one. This is just gorgeous, isn't it? So it just goes on and on. It's just lovely. And this does look like an aerial view of a landscape, doesn't it? So this in and of itself is a provocation. And so I want to provoke you, can you create experiences in wonder and curiosity? You absolutely can, using provocations in the classroom. And I'm going to encourage you, this is that engage piece. This is how we engage kids. It's through the wonder and curiosity, the provocation. This is my Instagram. I'm going to encourage you to go to my Instagram. Not because I'm fishing for followers and not because I've got a beautiful family and you can see, resources that I'm sharing, but I want you to go to Instagram because I want you to see the provocations that I'm sharing there. And so way up here at the top, right there with that arrow, that's where the provocations are. And I curate provocations from my work with schools, ones that I'm using with my kids, and ones that teachers actually send me. I'm always getting DMs from teachers saying, hey, I got this provocation, I thought of you. And I post maybe one a week, and then I curate them there in my highlights, the provocation highlights. And I want to share a few with you now. And what I'm going to share with you now is something that I'm going to ask you to consider using with your students as you give them a provocation. It's what we call a thinking routine. And again, I don't know, Jason, can you tell me, can the attendees see me in my webcam here as I'm speaking? They can? Great, great, great. So this is a book that I'm absolutely in love with. It's called The Power of Making Thinking Visible. It's by Mark Church and Ron Richart. I'm actually hosting Ron on my Instagram tomorrow morning at 10 a.m. Pacific time, asking him about his book. We're going to have an hour conversation. And if you're familiar with Ron Richart's work at the Harvard Ed Lab, and you know his thinking routines, it's going to be a fantastic hour conversation. So I invite you to be a part of that community. See, this is it. We are a community. Come be a part of that conversation. But Ron's work has deeply impacted my practice in his thinking routines. And I want to share one thinking routine that I've kind of adapted from Ron's work that I'm going to give you now. And the thinking routine is 3 questions. So when I give my students a provocation, I ask them these 3 questions. One question, the first question is, and if you want to write these down, by all means, feel free. The first question is, what do you notice? What do you notice? And Jason, if you wouldn't mind curating these questions and just throwing them in the chat, these 3, what do you notice? And we pause and I give students 3 or 4 or 5 minutes just to write their noticings, their observations. I notice that, I see that, I observe that. The next question is, what do you wonder? What questions do you have? What are you curious about? Take 3 or 4 or 5 minutes, write down your curiosities. They quietly, no collaboration, they quietly just write their questions. I wonder about, I'm curious about. And then the third question is, what do you know? And this is what I've adapted in this thinking routine is I've left the what do you know to the very end. And this is that prior knowledge piece that we know is so important in education. Students aren't empty vessels coming into our classrooms, are they? Students come in with years of learning and experience and narrative that we want to tap into. And so what do you know honors that, but it saves it till the end. And I'll tell you why I save it till the end. It's because of my son, actually. I have an 11-year-old named Ewan, and Ewan is fantastic. I love him to death, as a dad should. But in this case, Ewan can be a little bit of a know-it-all in school. And anytime there's an opportunity to put up his hand, to access prior knowledge and share, he's the first kid to put up his hand. And it's like lightning. It's like, boom. And you know what sadly happens? And I see it because I teach seniors who have checked out because of young people like my son. They've checked out because they've gotten used to the game of learning that someone else is going to put up their hand first and that their opinion doesn't matter. And they'll get active when they have to get active. They'll get active when the learning matters most, which is when they have to put pen to paper or when it's worth marks. And by leaving the what do you know to the end and honoring the observations and the questions first, every student is active because every student has a curiosity and a wonder from a provocation. And so what happens is the guy who knows it all doesn't get to speak until the end after everyone shared their curiosities. So I'm going to ask you to look at a few provocations with me now as that blinking arrow goes and goes and goes. And these provocations are ones directly from my Instagram. And no, this isn't the provocation, just a big red dot. This is actually a math provocation. It's tied to a math concept. And I'm going to hit play now. And I ask you to consider, what do you notice? What do you wonder? And what do you know? I do love this one. Wow, something's happening. I'm noticing a pattern. So isn't that a fantastic one? And you know, initially at the start of the math unit that this concept is tied to, our students don't have the language of math yet, do they? Like they have that prior knowledge, but with this specific concept, they may not have the language of the concept down yet. So I say their observations and their wonderings, they may appear to be a little bit superficial. That's okay, because we're going to collect all that data. The what do you notice? What do you wonder? What do you know? And we're going to document that. Remember, I asked them to write those things down. And then I'd like to show this provocation after a couple of weeks of learning. And I'd like to revisit this provocation and ask them the same thinking routine. What do you notice? What do you wonder? What do you know? And see how their thinking has changed. And see if they're starting to use more of the math language that we hope they do in their writing and in their sharing. So I love this one. I love that it brings math to movement. You know, math just isn't memorizing a skill and putting pen to paper and doing it repeatedly until you've memorized it. Like, let's put some movement and action to math and bring it to life a little bit. So this short little provocation does wonders for creating wonders. Let me show you another one, not in math. This could be science. This could be biology. This could be, it could be tied to the concept of evolution even. And I'm just going to walk you through some things that I've heard students say. You know, I noticed that there are a bunch of small fish, but they're traveling like one large fish. And I noticed that they're taking turns to get to the bottom of the ocean. And I noticed that it's almost like they're communicating without communicating. And I wonder why they're behaving that way. I wonder why they are, you know, all together as one in a group. And I wonder what they're doing on the bottom of the ocean floor. And then the what do you know is kids will say things like, well, that's not a group of fish, that's a school of fish. And they're behaving this way because they're likely trying to protect themselves from a predator. And, you know, they're probably going to the bottom of the ocean to get food, and they're taking turns so they can each eat. And so that's where the thinking routine takes us. Isn't that a striking one? I just love that one. You know, let's just watch that one again. It's kind of eerie, isn't it? It's kind of creepy. And part of the provocation, the point is we want students to feel curious, feel wonder, maybe feel a little bit of discomfort, like, ooh. I don't want them to feel sad. Sometimes I want my students to feel empathy, absolutely, in a provocation, but I don't want to tear them down, and I certainly don't want them to be overwhelmed by feeling. You know, I think there are some really harsh realities that we're seeing in our world today. And part of our responsibility is to bring those realities to our classrooms and have students understand what's happening in the world, but not at the risk of causing hurt and anxiety. So I bring caution to you and your provocation planning, what you choose to bring in. Consider, of course, as we always are, students first, students first, students first. Here's another one, and I love this one. We're going to see a mouse here trying to travel through this maze. And I love showing this one, not tied to a concept, but because I want them to understand that the competency of creativity and divergent thinking is one in which I value. It's one in which I'm going to support them and help them strengthen and nurture. And it's one in which that if you aren't someone who thinks they're creative now, it's okay. We're going to work on that creativity together. And of course, you know, if I pause it here, I ask students, what do you think is going to happen? And students say, well, the mouse is just going to go through the maze and be successful. And the more they do it, the better they get. And I love this mouse. This mouse is a metaphor for the type of student I want to work with. And this is the point where all the kids laugh in class, right? They're like, I love that. That's me. I'm that guy. Why does school make me go through the maze? I want to just go my own way. And that's part of why I show them that. It's for those students who feel that way to know that in this space of student agency and inquiry, they're going to be able to, you know, do things differently. And I'm going to support them in doing that through the processes of which inquiry allows us to utilize, the 5 E's, for example. So I do love that one. And I encourage you to consider provocations such as this one. And this looks a little creepy. You know, if we're looking at science, if we're looking at, you know, something really specific, something topical like the eyeball, this is a simulation. This isn't a real eye, but isn't that eerie? Isn't that kind of beautiful? And same thing, what do you notice? What do you wonder? What do you know? And so this is just a really simple simulation, but doesn't it spark a little bit of engagement with the viewer? So please, as you go back to your work, consider how can you be an inquirer yourself? How can you model and coach inquiry and wonderment? How can you observe learning? Just watch your students as they're seeing a provocation and recognize where their curiosity is, and then lean into it. Like, I think that's our responsibility, is to lean into the curiosity. When we see it, when we feel it, when your kids are in the palm of your hand, attack that, lean into that, please. And provocations allow those moments to occur more often. I'm going to transition into the next segment of the keynote, and this is this idea of the power of student agency. And I want to share with you a simple Google form that has sparked some pretty amazing things for my students. And I teach roughly in a single year 150 kids. So I teach a lot of kids in a year. To be honest, it's a lot to keep track of, especially when it comes to questions and curiosities and student agency. And I find digital tools such as, Google Forms allow me to curate and organize really seamlessly. And at the start of the year, I asked my kids, what are you passionate about? And passions are a tricky thing. Many of my students say with this form, I'm just not passionate about anything. Like, I don't have a passion, and I can't knock them. Passions take time to stick with and nurture long-term, to go through the peaks and valleys of learning for it to become something that you truly love, despite how hard it can be. And so I break down the big question of passion to some smaller questions. When you were a child, what did you dream of becoming one day? I want to know that. What was that dream? And so I'm asking this to a teenager, like a 15-year-old, right? Like, maybe they were dreaming of becoming a fireman one day, or a doctor, or a video gamer. Like, I want to hear those dreams, because oftentimes those dreams still hold true for these students. And I kind of want to reconnect them to that inner curiosity, that inner child that perhaps schooling has schooled out, sadly. The next piece, what have you put time in order to become better at it, to improve because you love what you are doing? What do you spend time doing outside of school? If you can make a living doing what you love, what would you be doing in 10 years? And the data I collect from a form such as this, it's fantastic. One piece of data I collected was from a student named Evelyn. And this is actually Evelyn. Oh, sorry, I'm jumping the gun here. I'm just going to slide right through that one to get to Evelyn. This is Evelyn actually as a kindergarten student. So I didn't teach her in kindergarten, but upon working with Evelyn, I reached out to her family, her mom, and I asked her to tell me what Evelyn was like when Evelyn was young. And she shared this photo with me, and they've given me permission to use it. She's just such an adorable kindy. If you're a parent at home, you hold these photos near and dear to your heart of your children. And this is what Evelyn's mom told me about Evelyn. She was always a happy child. Evelyn loved imaginary play. She loved dressing up and acting. And slowly over time, this grew into a more serious love for costume and makeup. And this is what Evelyn shared with me in that Google form that she filled out for me. She shared with me her portfolio Instagram account. This isn't her personal account. This is one that she had been building for a few years about her reflecting her talents in makeup, her talents in special effects makeup. We're not a school that offers makeup, folks, nor are we a school that offers special effects makeup. This is all self-taught. This is all stuff that she was doing despite school, doing underneath my nose, and I had no idea until I asked. And that's the thing. If we don't ask the right questions, we won't get to the heart of what a student's passion or curiosity or wonder is. And I just want to show you some of Evelyn's work here. It's fascinating. Like, what? I had no idea she was this good as I was teaching her. Kind of creepy, absolutely. In Victoria here, we do a zombie walk where people can show up, makeup and dress like a zombie. And this is her work, self-taught, YouTube, trial and error, investment of time, investment of money. And in asking Evelyn if I could show you these photos, she said, yes, as long as you show this one where I look normal. And this is her makeup for prom, for grad. And she's a really intelligent young person, very friendly, very compassionate. And, I'm just so thankful that she was willing to share these photos with us. And I leave you with this split image of Evelyn here as a 17-year-old graduating student at our school, with this one as, her as a kindergarten student. And it's so important to note that wherever we have students in the journey of which they're on and that we work with them, you know, those littles, as I like to call them, grow into the bigs. And the common thread is their curiosity and their wonder and their passion. They have it. And what we don't want to have happen is schooling negatively affect that. We actually want to do the opposite. We want schooling to lift that up and awaken that, as Sir Ken Robinson likes to say. And so Evelyn shared with me a number of things in her work with me that year. One thing we decided to build as part of her portfolio was a YouTube channel. And she was applying to this special effects makeup school. And this was her portfolio, was going to be a part of that application. And so we made this her free inquiry project for the year, was building that portfolio. And this is just some footage. I'm going to turn it down because it's quite loud here. I think you can hear over me. There we go. I'm going to turn it right down because the music gets loud. This is her doing time-lapse looks. This is her turning her camera on. And so her Instagram account is just static. It's just the final product. This is showing the admissions of the school she's applying to, that she can do it start to finish. And I love these clips. You know, this is roughly, you know, 3.5 minutes of a look that took a couple hours to create. And this is the end. Whoa, there we go. Sorry, I apologize. This is the end product here. Isn't this fascinating? Such a talented person. And I never would have been able to honor that talent and support that talent if I didn't ask at first. And, you know, this is Evelyn. So every year we do an inquiry gala at my school where students invite parents, you know, brothers and sisters, classmates, other classes, community members to come and look at their portfolio of inquiry and look at their learning. And she had about maybe 80 people in front of her that she was speaking to. And she asked for a volunteer. And like the 10 kids that were kind of around me literally pushed me into Evelyn's makeup chair. And she had kind of staged it that it had to be me. And she not only made these prosthetic horns in front of the audience, she glued them to my forehead. So I had to wear them for the rest of the event. And that just goes to show you the relationship and, you know, the friendship that you form with your students through the power of personalized learning and inquiry. Needless to say, Evelyn holds a soft spot in my heart, as do all of my students. She got into the Justice Institute, the J Institute for Special Effects here in British Columbia. And this is her portfolio just recently. This is some of the work that she's doing right now. And I'm just so thankful that I was able, again, to provide some space and some support. Now, I'm an English teacher, an English 12 teacher, and I look at my curriculum, and nowhere in my curriculum does it say special effects makeup. But does it say things about competencies, creativity, collaboration? Absolutely. And are there certain learning objectives that we could tie, that we could attach to Evelyn's passion? Yes. Evelyn didn't know that. I did, because I'm the curriculum expert. I know my curriculum really well. So I propose that you're malleable with your curriculum. It's agile. You can morph it depending on where students' curiosities are. And, you know, some subject areas may be more of a stretch than others, but I think in Evelyn's project, we could have found science, you know, math, art. There's so many subjects that we silo that could all be attached to a project such as Evelyn's. I want to introduce you to my second young student that I want to speak to, and then my last one will be after this one, of course. This is my main man, Mitchell. This is Mitchell at the first day of grade 1. I don't know if you take photos of your kids on the first day of school, but this is Mitchell, first day of grade 1. And this is what Mitchell's dad had to say. Mitchell was always creative. He showed a love for music at a young age. He simply loved to play. I just love that. He loved to play. You know, as young people, they get lost in play. And I wish that we could honor play more in our classrooms. Don't you? You know, collaboration, communication, socialization, that's what play looks like at the teenage years. And so how do we get them to play more in class? He was also a shy boy. He didn't like performing when he was young. This came over time with great help from his teachers. I love that, you know, the role of the teacher in this nurturing. This is Mitchell in his grade 12 year. And notice he's not the front man. He's way back there. There he is playing the guitar. So still a little shy, but at least he's on stage. And in Mitchell's form, he revealed a couple really neat things to me. I knew he was a fantastic musician. I had seen him play at assemblies and at concerts countless times. what he revealed to me in the form was actually a love for something that I hadn't anticipated at all. And again, there's Mitchell as a young man. He grows into the Mitchell I know. And he revealed the love for 3D art and IT in our school, infotech. And so I said, well, we have a 3D printer. Like, let's go down and use it for some learning. And so he hatched this amazing plan to combine his three loves: his love for performance and playing the guitar, his love for 3D printing, and his love for writing. He's a budding poet, which I always saw in English, but he combined these three things for his inquiry project. He collaborated with his music teacher, his IT teacher, and me as English teacher. And at the free inquiry gala at the end of the year, he whipped out his showcase, his showpiece product. And if you look close, friends, that's a 3D printed guitar. I just think it's the coolest thing. He 3D printed a guitar and he played a song. And I'm going to ask you, do you know this band? What band is this? You could throw your answer in the chat if you do. Have a listen.
Trevor, you may need to share the sound. There's an option to do that.
Oh,
You can use the
yes.
sound right now.
Let's go there. Thank you. Thank you, David. I appreciate that. I just got to stop. I know you've lost my screen here. I'm going to go back to it here in a moment. And that's a great prompt. I did forget to do that when I was, there we go. Thank you, David. So let's go back to that. So the sound was good that time. I saw people nodding their head. And if you got it in the chat, it was AC/DC. And I just love Mitchell for drawing the curtain back for his teachers as to how we could support him. You know, I didn't say go do a cross-disciplinary project. He came to us and said, I love this, this, and this. I'd like to do this. Let's make it happen. And undeniably, that's the kind of energy that you kind of get behind, isn't it? You kind of get out of the way of that energy because it's so amazing. And I wouldn't have seen that energy unless I'd asked and given Mitchell permission to show him that, hey, that's amazing stuff. I want that. The last student I want to speak to is Ethan. And Ethan's the young man looking really cool on the far left in that bright blue fleece jacket. And this is Ethan on the first day of grade 1 with all of his buddies. And the cool thing is, all 4 boys were in my grade 12 class together doing an inquiry project and participated in an inquiry gala. And this photo is taken in the community of which they grew up. You know, learning is community focus. It gets into the community. It transcends the bell schedule, and it's long lasting. And those are things I learned with Ethan's help. You know, Ethan was a fantastic young man to work with. This is Ethan's mom talking about Ethan. And when I first met Ethan's mom, she said to me, I kid you not, she said, good luck with Ethan, right? That's what she said. And she said that because Ethan hated school. He genuinely hated school. And Ethan's mom told me Ethan always built things. He would take things apart so he could put them back together again. He would get lost in play. There's that powerful play piece again. He always needed to be doing something with his hands. This is when Ethan is happiest, when he is doing. And I asked his mom, I said, has school been a place where he's been told to sit still? And she said, yeah. And she told me that Ethan was always, they were always asked to test Ethan, take him to the doctor, see, you know, he's always moving around. He's always wanting to move. And she told me it's just because he likes to play, he has to be moving. He doesn't need to be medicated. That's the way he learns. And it took him a grade 12 experience in his final semester for that to be not just recognized, but for teachers to kind of get out of the way of that energy and support that energy. Sad story, but a beautiful story in the end. And I'll tell you why. This is Ethan here, cool Ethan as a 17-year-old. And look how somber he looks. Doesn't he look a little bit gruff and moody? I could say that because he's an amazing young man. And this is Ethan as that cool kid in grade 1. And again, the tie between the youngsters we work with and the seniors we work with, the tie is their curiosity and their wonder and their interests. This was Ethan's timetable in grade 12, and we're a semester school. So this was his last 5 months of his grade 12 year. And if you're a school like ours, you know, students fulfill requirements, credits, and towards their last couple of, you know, semesters, seniors can kind of build the timetable that they want if they fulfill those requirements. And so this is Ethan's kind of dream final semester that he built for himself. And like, look at that schedule. Like it tells you something about the teenage Ethan, doesn't it? And you know, what kind of a student books a spare first block? It's the student that wants to sleep in and not come to school until 10 a.m. And then this is a fascinating tale. Ethan had homeroom with his auto shop teacher. And so Ethan wouldn't sleep in on his spare. He'd come in during his spare and mentor a younger class. He was their senior mentor. And then he would stay in through homeroom. And then he had 2 blocks of auto shop. Quite frequently, Ethan would show up to English wearing greasy coveralls. He wouldn't even get changed. He would just show up in coveralls. And that goes to show you what Ethan's passionate about. What is he interested in? Like, it doesn't take a rocket science. And sadly, I don't teach auto shop. I teach English. So how am I going to harness that energy and that enthusiasm and that engagement in English? Pretty easily, Ethan taught me. This is what Ethan does on his weekends. He buys things like this and he fixes them up, and then he takes them 4x4ing into the forest. This is in behind his house, actually. And his dad has to tow him out of the mud. This is Ethan's passion. This is what he does. And so in that Google form, he revealed a lot about automotives and what he spends his time doing. And then when it came time to choosing a direction for his final project for the end of the year and his free inquiry gala, Ethan said that he bought a bazoo. And I said, what's a bazoo? And he looked at me like I was crazy. He said, you don't know? Like, everyone knows what a bazoo is. And he told me that a bazoo is a 1970s amphibious vehicle. It's the kind of thing that it's a car, and it's like a 4x4 like buggy, but then you could drive it into the ocean or a lake and it becomes a boat. And he had bought this thing off a used website and for $500, and he wanted to fix it up. And his big question was, how much has technology changed in 40 years? And has it changed so much that I can't rebuild this bazoo? So that was all of his research was, you know, what do I need to do? And it was quite practical research, isn't it? Research, application, this beautiful circle of learning. And Ethan was, you know, really gung-ho, really keen. But sadly, he, like many students do, he encountered a roadblock in his learning. And it happened when he couldn't find information about his transmission. And he came to me one day saying, T-Mac, I got a problem. And it was a Friday afternoon. I'll never forget it. It was the last block of the day. And he said to me, I think I need to change my project because I can't fix my transmission. I've asked the mechanic here at the school, the shop teacher. I've asked a local mechanic. My dad can't help me. My uncle can't help me. All of his experts couldn't help me. And he said, what should we do? And I said, well, let's go away on the weekend. I'll do some research. You do some final research. And if we come back Monday with nothing, maybe we pivot and we do something different. And that's okay. Like, sometimes you have to change, and I'm okay with that. And you should be okay with that. And I tried all weekend to find an answer for Ethan with regards to this transmission challenge he was having. And I came up short. And I came to school dejected Monday. I was kind of dreading seeing Ethan Monday afternoon because I was going to have to break it to him that we were going to change his project. And he came into the class so happy, so enthused. And I said, what happened? And he said, let me show you. And he opened up his laptop and he showed me this website. And the cool thing about this website is it has a forum where he and his dad had created an account, and he was posting questions that he needed help with. And there were mechanics from around the world, mostly hobbyists, who were really in love with bazoos of all things. Who knew there was a bazoo culture? But Ethan found it, and he was asking them these questions, and he was getting the answers he needed. And so that taught me a lot. That taught me that I'm not the only expert in a student's life. That taught me to think outside the box. That taught me that giving students some genuine decision making over research, if they can't solve it, you know, and I can't solve it, that's okay, but maybe they can solve it. And so this went on for another week of research, and then Ethan came to me again. And he said, Mr. McKenzie, I have another problem. He said, I'm done my research, and you know, we have a couple more weeks of this project, but my bazoo's at home, my tools are at home, I need to work on the bazoo, and I don't have enough time. And I said, well, what do you want to do? And he said, well, I want to be at home. And so we called a meeting with his auto shop teacher, because remember, the only 2 teachers working with Ethan were his auto teacher and myself, and with the principal and with Ethan's parents. And we said, listen, like, why doesn't Ethan stay home for 2 weeks and work on this bazoo? And could you support him in this? Would that be safe? Would that be okay? And they said, absolutely. They said, yes. And the shop teacher and I said on one condition, every day we want an email from Ethan telling us what he did that day. So there's some accountability. And Ethan said, absolutely, I could do that. At 3 o'clock every day, and Ethan taught me this, don't give up on a student's dreams, right? It could have been so easy for me to say, no, you can't go home. No, that's a challenge we can't consider. But Ethan taught me not to give up on his dreams. And every day at 3 o'clock, I would get an email notification, and it was time-lapse footage of what Ethan got done that day. And each morning, each day, he'd set up a GoPro, and he'd record his work. He'd record his learning. And this is beautiful stuff. It's beautiful because it looks like busy work, but it's absolutely necessary work to getting his project done. It's the portfolio stuff, isn't it? This is the process and not just the product. This is the dirty work, quite literally the dirty work. And then you see other people involved. You know, you see his dad come and help him. You see his uncle. You see his cousins. It is quite a family community experience. Ethan was getting up some mornings at 6:30 in the morning in the dark. He would send me footage at 6:30 at night in the dark. Like, Ethan had never done that much homework for me in the 2 years that I taught him. And he was demonstrating in these short time-lapse videos all the learning that I was just like, check, check, check in my gradebook. He was demonstrating all those competencies and standards that are in my curriculum, but he was never really showing he could do because it wasn't aligned with something he was really interested in. This went on for 2 weeks of him sending us footage. And finally, he came back to school, and I assumed he'd be really excited because I was seeing the progress on the Bazoo. And he came back to school, and his dream for the gala was to drive his Bazoo off a flatbed trailer into the gymnasium of our school and have people come and see it. And he came back to school dejected and sad. And I said, Ethan, what's going on? I was so proud of you. I was seeing all that rich evidence of learning, the process. And he said to me, I kid you not, he said, I think you're going to fail me. And I know your course is mandatory to grad, and I'm worried I'm not going to graduate. I said, why would I fail you? And he's like, well, the Bazoo it's not going to be done. The transmission was crazy, and I wasn't able to finish it. And I said, Ethan, look at all the evidence here. Look at all the learning so far. I said, the product, the final piece working is kind of like an afterthought. It's irrelevant. Like, look at all the stuff that you've done to get to this point. And I said, could you show me the final product as it is right now? And he said, yeah, I thought you'd ask for that. And he said, here's what I recorded yesterday. And this is a short video of what the Bazoo looks like when he was done the project at that point. There's no sound to this. There's a little bit of text for you to read. I love that piece. As all learning does, it has things being kind of hidden under the surface. Beautiful Victoria, British Columbia. And this is his Bazoo. Spelling mistakes included. I love it. So real, so raw, so authentic, and so personalized, right? Like, no other student that I've ever met would probably think of building a Bazoo as their final project. And I think it's beautiful. Despite it not working, I think it's beautiful. So cool. I kid you not, a year and a half later, I'm going to turn down the volume. A year and a half later, I got a Facebook notification from none other than Ethan's mom. And she said, you'll never guess what got done today. I said, get out of town. And she said, look at this. And she tagged me to a post that the dad had made. And it was this whole video. And this is him getting it done. This is that moment where you give your kids the car keys for the first time and they drive away and you're like, oh my God, come back alive. This is the Bazoo working. And the plan was for the entire family to drive up to a local lake and take it for its maiden voyage. And this is everybody. This is uncles and aunts and cousins. And they swear to me that they're drinking coffee in those cups. They swear that it's coffee. And this is Ethan, giving it a go for the first time and actually seeing if it will sink or if it will operate as it should. And I love this footage. It's loud. If I turn up the volume, there's laughter, there's cheering. One of the people here in this crowd is his current girlfriend, the girl here in the Bazoo with him now. and her name's Caitlin, and Caitlin was actually in our class together, and they were just friends at the time. And she saw how hard it was for Ethan to do that work in grade 12, and now she's able to celebrate it with him here. It's such a beautiful story. This is Ethan and his cousin taking it in for the first time. And the smiles are real. Like, have you ever had a student turn in homework a year and a half late? I hadn't. Like, it was amazing. It was such a fulfilling feeling for me. I couldn't imagine what it would feel like for him. The way the bazoo works is as the wheels spin, it propels the bazoo through the lake, through the water. What you don't see here is how long they were stuck in the lake for, because he does a little time lapse here and all of a sudden they're like backing out. I'm like, how long were you stuck in that water for? And the dad is really keen. So the dad's behind the video right now, and the dad wants to see, you know, did it leak? Is there a big pool of water in there? And, you know, are you going to sink? I'm worried about your safety. And so he comes kind of rushing up to the bazoo and he wants to have a look inside. And the boys are like, get out of the way, Dad, get out of the way. And he's like, is it wet in there? And then the dad says, what are you guys doing? And they're like, we want to do it again, but we're going to go faster. Like boys do, right? Like, let's do it really, really fast. And this is them one last time ripping into the lake. And it didn't sink. It operated as it should. And just, can we give Ethan some snaps? Yeah, I love the snaps with this team. That's fantastic. And like I said, I learned a lot from Ethan. I learned a lot about resilience. He taught me so much, as our students do. We learn from them just as much as they learn from us. I learned a lot about competencies. And I think probably the most significant thing I learned is that, you know, if we don't give up on our kids, if we truly believe in them, they will in turn believe in themselves. I think that belief I had in Ethan and the support I gave him allowed him to continue on with that bazoo work outside of school. And I used to be the type of teacher who said, it's not me, you know, I didn't have anything to do with that. But I have a big thing to do with that. You know, the space I give, the support I give, what I value in education shapes the student experience. And so I want to leave you with that. You know, I want to challenge you with believing in your students, like endlessly, unceasingly believe in them and what the possibilities and opportunities are for them and before them. And I encourage you to lean into their curiosities, you know, nurture those and have them see that through that belief in self, really amazing things can happen. So Ethan now is a mechanic at a local shop. Mitchell is a budding musician, has a CD out. And of course, Evelyn is in special effects makeup. What I didn't share with you is in that Google form, she gave me a goal, and that was one day she wants to win an Academy Award for special effects makeup. And so in attaining that goal, she wants to move down to LA, and COVID is now in her way of moving down to LA and getting a job down there. So I'm really thankful for your time, for, you know, not just being committed throughout this program this summer, the Institute, but also just with your attention and your engagement here. I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and Jason, if you would like to help me maybe field some of those questions that came up in the chat, and or if you have any that you have prepared, Jason, but I'll kick it over to you for a moment.
Yes, well, first of all, I just want to say thank you very much, Trevor, for sharing all your insights. And yes, let's please give some great snaps.
Oh, thank you, everyone. I appreciate you all. Thank you.
Some really amazing stuff. And you know, I want to go back in the classroom right now and teach some kids. So I'm sure everyone else is with me. That's really, really cool. So yeah, definitely some questions to share. One of them was a bit more pragmatic. A bit earlier on, there was a question about, could you share the questions that you asked students in your Google form?
Yeah. Oh, I can't copy and paste those. I'm just curious if maybe the best way to get those questions from me is I can either bring the slide back up right now, Jason, and they could just take a photo of that one particular entry, or people can, someone took a screenshot. That's excellent, Barbara. Or you could just send me a message on my website or a DM. But my website is trevormckenzie.com/contact. And that's just a contact page. You can say, hey, I saw that amazing keynote and I want those questions, and I'd be happy to just type them in for you. But I did see someone grab the screenshot. Yeah, that's fantastic. Let's go with that. Hit me up in the contact page on my website and I'll send those your way.
Excellent. That's great. And then I'll just mention, so there's one more question I'm going to ask you. So if anybody has some questions that you want to ask Trevor, give you a few moments to think about it, you can feel free to raise your hand. Just go to under participants and press a little raise hand, and then you can unmute yourself and ask him. So while you're thinking about that a bit, there was a question that Christy Romero asked earlier about coaches. So what if you're a coach and you want to help teachers? I think the way she phrased it was dive into the pool, or get started in the pool. How do you get started there?
That's a great question. And a lot of the work I do is with that layer of leadership, that kind of teacher leader, teacher as coach, teacher as curriculum designer and supporter. And I have a number of things that you can consider. And this is for anyone in the room that wants to share this work with their staff to build capacity. I always say with that swimming pool analogy, start in the shallow end, start with that structured inquiry, and teachers will feel confident in that shallow end because perhaps it's most similar to the way they've taught in the past. There are some slight changes in inquiry that we're going to add, but it's not a drastic shift. I'd say obviously a more drastic shift would be starting with free inquiry, which we don't want for our kids. We don't want to kick them into the deep end. So we don't want our colleagues to start there. So by showing them the baby steps and the scaffolding, I find that there's easy, not just buy-in, but like confidence. They're like, I can do this. So what I'm proposing there is share the swimming pool. Like I visit schools around the world where the swimming pool is already posted on tables or at photocopiers, and they're like, oh, you're that guy, that's your work, you're here now, this is so great, because it's a great reminder of how to scaffold. So I would start there, at a kind of more macro level. That's macro level. I really appreciate the coaches who build resources for staff to make the work easier. And time is always a factor. So some of the coaching teams I work with build provocations and build collections of provocations that are in folders, digital folders that are conceptually kind of titled. So a concept could be sustainability, and within that folder there's a whole bunch of provocations that teachers can just go in and click on and bring into their kids. And so what we're doing there is we're making the hard work easier, and we're working smarter, not harder, by just allowing the team to build for the individual teachers. And a really powerful piece that I see in the schools that I work with, and I visit a lot of schools in a year, but every school I visit, I visit multiple times. It's just not a one visit. Like I get to see them across 3 years. It's such a beautiful partnership. And it's that teachers watch each other teach. Teachers coach and they offer, hey, come into my room and watch me do what I do. And hey, I'd love to teach this lesson for your kids. Can you watch me teach today? And here's this provocation. Can you watch me do this thinking routine for your kids so you can see me in action, or you can give me feedback? And that is culture of inquiry, isn't it? Like that is teacher agency, where teacher as inquirer and collaborator and in a community of learning. So those are 3 ways that you can bring this good work to your schools in that capacity. I also want you to consider what competencies do you want your students to nurture? And if questioning is a competency, well, what good work is being done at your school in the classrooms around questioning? And there should be something intentional. Is it the question formulation technique? Is there a questioning framework or protocol that we are introducing so teachers can teach to the competency? Competencies don't just happen because we're doing inquiry. Competencies happen because we are planning for them to happen. Inquiry doesn't just happen, we plan for inquiry to happen. So address those competencies, identify them, and make sure that they're being nurtured. So those are some big ideas, and that's a fantastic question.
Great, thank you very much. And it looks like Michelle has her hand raised. So Michelle, go ahead and unmute yourself and share.
Yeah, Michelle, thanks so much for raising your hand and being willing to share.
Awesome. Thank you for that presentation. Amazing. And thank you, TGR, for doing this. So my question is in regards to students, if in your experience, when you do these kinds of inquiry projects with them, is there any pushback, and how do you address that with students who might be a little reluctant to kind of jump in initially? And even if it's through other schools you visited, if you have teachers who are struggling to get students to be engaged, what are some of the tips and tricks that might work to help that?
Yeah, absolutely. I didn't call it pushback when I started this good work. Reluctance, anxiety, absolutely, lack of buy-in even. And it manifests in really odd ways. It can manifest in a student deciding to skip class, and that's too much for me. It can manifest in phone calls from parents saying, what does that look like? And I just welcome all of that as an opportunity to talk it out and draw the curtain back on things. And what I've learned over the years is scaffolding matters. The first year I was, diving into the deep end, and the majority of my students loved it, but there were a handful that were really overwhelmed. And in my research and going back to the planning space and the drawing board, that scaffolding has been critical, just critical. And it allows parents to see that there's a process. It's just not a project. It's how we live and breathe. It allows students to see that we're never far away. Like, I'm never kicking you into the deep end. It's never free time. It's never wasted time. And that free inquiry isn't free time. There's a ton of accountability there. So that the scaffolding, first and foremost, is key. Another piece is just like, let's just recognize that kids aren't used to agency, sadly. All kids have agency. School takes away agency. Complacent learning, lecturing for an hour at a time. And lecturing is important. I lecture. I do explicit instruction, but it's not all I do. It's one tool in my tool belt. And so sadly, kids are not used to agency anymore. And so when you ask them to do the heavy lifting, they've gotten used to asking, jumping through the hoop. They just want to know the hoop. And so really being explicit in that voice and choice matters from day one. And so what I'm speaking to there is co-designing. One of the underpinnings of the inquiry classroom is co-designing with kids. And you need to start co-designing on the very first day or week with your students. Like, co-design something, co-design anything, co-design your class expectations, co-design what collaboration and group work will look like, co-design your course syllabus. I do that every year. I don't hand a course syllabus to my kids. We build it together. I say, here's all the must-dos and knows of our curriculum. The rest is up to us. What do you want to do? What do you want to know? And I ask them some specific questions that allow us to co-design a course syllabus. And what that does from the very first day or week is it shows students that, wow, this classroom is going to be different. I'm going to be asked to do some of the heavy lifting, and it's kind of fun and it's safe, and my voice matters. It's just not, a voice that's superficial or doesn't have legs. It's actually going to shape how we live and operate and breathe in this space. With parents, my books aren't for parents. My books are for teachers. But I do book studies with parents all the time in the schools that I work with. And I don't get all the parents participating, but I get the ones that are engaged and are almost the ones that are the movers and shakers, if you will, that have a pulse on the conversations happening at home. And the books I'm sharing aren't about inquiry. They're about, adolescent brain development. They're about what happens when, why are students acting out? Why are young children, acting out? It may be because they're not given enough control over their lives and they're seeking out autonomy and control, i.e. agency, right? And so we choose books for parents to read that are aligned with the change that we're trying to propose in the classroom. Parents are advocates for the teaching that they experience as students themselves. We teach the way we were taught in schools and the way that we were taught to teach. And to break out of that mold requires us to provide immense clarity and immense scaffolding, both of which are awesome in inquiry. I wouldn't want to do it any other way. So I hope that sheds some light onto how you could, address some of those anxieties, uncertainties. Provocations are a big help, as you saw in the keynote and with David's work. When we start with sparking your curiosity, it tends to put kids into the driver's seat of learning. So, and know that that experience you're having with some reluctance is entirely normal, and that there are ways that we can go about kind of grappling with that, as I shared some ideas with you.
Great. Thank you for that, Trevor. And I'll just ask one more time, any other questions? Yeah, let's definitely snap that up. Thanks. Thanks, Michelle. Okay, so any other questions? I don't see hands up or anything in chat right now. So what I'll say is, based on where we are kind of on time, is I think we'll end the questions there, but definitely if there are some additional questions that people have, you can contact us at TGR. We'd be happy to share those with Trevor and get some answers. And just one quick thing I want to share with all of you on my screen. I'm going to send some of the other announcements we had for tonight through email. so you can get those. But what a great place for us to, from this inspiration. I mean, I just want to share with all of you, the reason we asked Trevor to come out is because we wanted him to really, share his kind of view of inquiry and really inspire us for the work we can do. I'd say he's slam dunked both those things. So very, very excited that you're able to be here tonight. Please go on to the Educator Forum and share, what's your inspiration for this year? You'll see a prompt there that I've just posted at 8 o'clock tonight. How do you plan on starting your inquiry journey for this year? What are some of the barriers that you could use some help from the community in getting over? So please share with your colleagues and with us what you're planning. And, we love to see all that and see where that inspiration takes you. So with that, I'm actually going to stop share my screen again. I'm going to put a couple links in the chat here. One, just a reminder to our teacher forum, and then a few other links that could be useful to you. Like I said, we'll be sending an email with a few announcements and reminders coming out. So at this point, just really one last time, can you tell I'm overcome? This is just really a great experience. One more snaps for Trevor.
Thank you, everybody. Much appreciated, and look forward to staying connected with you all. Appreciate you both. Jason, David, thank you for bringing me in to support and have the conversation.
All right, thanks so much. Thanks everyone for joining. Really good to see you all. Look forward to seeing you again soon.
So we'll see you all next time.